Aja Joshi. I'm the Director of Community Outreach and Inclusion at the Nova Scotia Department of Communities, Culture and Heritage, and I am happy to be your host today for our Lunch and Learn. So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We have a large number of folks here with us today, so you'll notice your cameras and your mics will be muted. However, there's the chat function available where you're able to interact with us today. In terms of the flow of today's session, we will soon be hearing from our speaker, Dr. Katie Cotreau-Robbins, after which there will be a Q&A session that we are so lucky to have moderated by Dr. Afua Cooper from Dalhousie University. So for those joining us for today's Lunch and Learn, please post your questions and comments in the chat, and our moderator and we'll be keeping an eye on them during our session. Before we go through the rest of the housekeeping items, though, I want to take a quick moment to introduce our moderator before we get to our speaker, and she will also be providing an African acknowledgement. Dr. Afua Cooper is a full-time professor at Dalhousie University through the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, a poet, a performer, a scholar, historian, and cultural commentator. Dr. Cooper's expertise and contributions in history and art and education was recognized when the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission awarded her in 2015 with the Nova Scotia Human Rights Award. As a celebrated poet, Afua was also recently installed as Halifax's 7th Poet Laureate. She's the author of many books, including Cooper, Women of Other Poems. Dr. Cooper holds a PhD in Black Canadian Studies and the African Diaspora from the University of Toronto, and her expertise includes African Canadian culture, Black women's history, gender, slavery, and abolition. So great to have her here as a moderator for our speaker this afternoon. We're very lucky. Over to you, Dr. Cooper, to welcome everyone and provide an African acknowledgement, and then back over to me. Go ahead, Dr.
Thank you. Thank you, Aja. Greetings to everyone and to the team. I'm happy to be here. My acknowledgement is for the African ancestors who were captured, stolen from Africa, placed in the bottom of slave ships. Many of them died. We know at least 2 million of them died in the Atlantic Oceans, their bones still at the bottom of the sea as we speak. And for those who survived, the millions and millions of those who were captured, those who died in the ocean, those who survived within the Americas and survived, endured close to 400 years of brutal and horrific slavery. So my acknowledgement is for them. It's because of them why I'm here at this moment. And I pray for their spirits, and I honor their struggle and their contribution. And what Kate is going to be doing shortly is part of that honoring, bringing their memory to life, bringing their history to life. Thank you. Over to you, Aja.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cooper. We'll be seeing you again shortly. Please note as well, everyone, that this session is also being recorded. I also want to thank Rebecca Humphreys from the Public Service Commission, who's providing tech support for all of us today. You'll notice your cameras and mics are turned off, but as I said, the chat function is available, which Rebecca, Dr. Cooper, and others will be monitoring. Rebecca, if you have anything else to add, if I missed anything before we move on, I'll turn it to you for a moment.
Yeah, the only other thing is if you need closed captioning, you can turn that on from your end. If you hover over the 3 little ellipses at the top of your screen, that is the More Actions button, and you click on that, you should be able to turn on live captions. So that is done at the user end. I can't turn on live captioning for everyone, so we ask that if you need it, you can do so at your end. Other than that, the chat function, as Aja has said, is available to you. So if you have any questions throughout, you can put them in the chat as we're going, and we can address them at the end.
Thank you, Rebecca. And again, thank you for everyone for coming today. I'll be turning it over now to our Deputy Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage, Dr. Kesa Monroe Anderson, who will provide a few remarks as well as introduce our speaker, Dr. Katie, as well. And so again, thank you. It's a collaboration between Public Service Commission, CCH, and African Nova Scotian Affairs. So we're thrilled to have everyone join us. Over to you, Deputy Minister.
Thank you very much, Aja, and thank you to the entire committee at CCH who worked diligently to provide and plan this session for us today. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. Without you, we would not have a successful session either. And a special welcome, of course, to my esteemed colleagues, Dr. Afua Kupa, serving as our moderator, and Dr. Katie Kutro-Robbins. Thank you very much. We are holding this discussion today in recognition of Emancipation Day, August the 1st, as you know, with this being the first year that Nova Scotia as a province and Canada as a nation, both officially recognizing this significant date. August the 1st, Emancipation Day, marks the anniversary of the date British Parliament abolished slavery across its empire in 1834. The Slavery Abolition Act of 1833, which took effect in 1834, legislated the freedom of over 800,000 enslaved people of African descent throughout the British colonies, of which Nova Scotia is included. I also wish to bring to your attention another important date, that of August the 23rd, which is the International Day for the Remembrance of the Slave Trade and its Abolition, which will be recognized on this coming Monday. It is on the dates of August the 22nd and into August the 23rd in 1791 that enslaved African people in Haiti, what is now known as Haiti, and the Dominican Republic, formed a revolt that resulted in their liberation from slavery. This act of resistance is significant because it reminds us that African people played a huge role, an important role in the actualization of the abolition of slavery, since this particular revolt spurred on revolts across many other jurisdictions where African people were enslaved. This act of courage and sacrifice is directly connected to the abolition of slavery and emancipation in the British Empire. So we must learn more about its significance, and we must never forget it. Recognizing Emancipation Day in Nova Scotia provides us with a tremendous opportunity to acknowledge and to hold open discussions like the one we'll have today about our shared history of the enslavement of people of African ancestry here in Nova Scotia and across Canada. And this is just one way that all of us as Nova Scotians can examine our relationship with the legacy of anti-Black racism, which is definitely rooted in the enslavement of African people and the institution of slavery. And we can also honor the contributions of African Nova Scotians and all people of African descent. Therefore, it's my absolute honor to welcome our guest speaker today, one of our very own from the Department of Communities, Culture and Heritage, Dr. Katie Kutro-Robbins, to speak with us on Nova Scotia's history and African Nova Scotian legacy and its connection to the institution of slavery, which existed here in Nova Scotia. Katie emulates the important philosophy that we are all connected to that legacy of slavery, regardless of the color of our skin, and we all have a responsibility to engage in this history and share this history. Katie takes this responsibility and engagement to another level, and I am honored to not only have her as our guest speaker today, but also to be able to say that she is a member of our CCH family through the archives, museums, and libraries. And to introduce her formally, Dr. Katie Kutro-Robbins, PhD, is the curator of archaeology of the Nova Scotia Museums within CCH and has been since 2007. She completed her PhD in the interdisciplinary program at Dalhousie University in 2012. The focus of the multi-year research was Nova Scotia's landscape of slavery at the end of the American Revolution, when thousands of Black loyalists, both enslaved and holding certificates of freedom, arrived in the Maritimes to hold and to start a new life. Her work for government requires two hats. One hat represents the work as the provincial archaeology curator, which encompasses the development of exhibits, focused research and publication, student monitoring, public engagement, and curation of the fastest growing collection in the Nova Scotia Museum system. The second hat is linked to Indigenous consultation and the provincial regulatory framework for archaeology, which is subject to the Special Places Protection Act. Everyone, please help me welcome Dr. Katie Boutro-Robbins.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your kind words, Deputy Minister. I'm delighted to be here today. And thanks to the audience, for folks taking time on their lunch to tune in and share in this, what I think is a really incredible story and important work that's happening in Nova Scotia. Thank you also to Aja and her team for getting all of this organized, and to Dr. Cooper for moderating today. I know everyone has very busy schedules, and I really appreciate folks coming together to get this all set up. I was delighted when the deputy asked me, or suggested when she visited the museum recently, that I present at this time, and link it to Emancipation Day related activities being organized by government. I'm always happy to share with wider government the work of the Nova Scotia Museum and my colleagues at CCH. So I know someone's going to advance the slides for me. I'm ready to begin. If we can do that. Okay, great, thank you. The announcement of Emancipation Day provided an important moment of reflection for curators at the Nova Scotia Museum. We discussed the range of historical objects in the provincial collections linked to the story of slavery to freedom, and also how much our work is now done in collaboration and with direction from community members who own the stories. My goal today is twofold. I want to share some of the exciting work that has taken place in recent decades, so a bit of a journey from there to here. Secondly, in the light of recent significant events and the moment we are all in as a society, I want to share the evolving path that the Nova Scotia Museum is on with this research. A few thoughts before I get into the meat of the presentation. This presentation is from the archaeology perspective. Simply put, in using the words of James Dietz, archaeology is the study of past peoples based on the objects they left behind and the ways they left their imprint on the world. There is only time to share today a few of the key projects, but I would like folks to keep in mind that over the past 30 years, there has been over 45 archaeology projects in Nova Scotia linked to the early Black history and culture, resulting in over 60 recorded archaeology sites, the establishment of a cultural landscape, the development of artifact collections, numerous public presentations and exhibits and publications, a National Film Board production, community symposiums, and the establishment of 2 museums. So I'm not going to cover that all today, but I wanted to give you that context of the volume of work and dedication by so many to develop this story. Next slide, please. I thought I would begin with a brief background. I'm often asked, given I'm not African Nova Scotian, how I came to do this work and in fact focus my education and career in government on the subject of archaeology and the early Black history of Nova Scotia. This slide illustrates the beginning for me. I had the opportunity many years ago to participate in an archaeological field school in Virginia. The focus was the excavation of the workshops of the enslaved who were living on the main plantation of Thomas Jefferson, Monticello, in the 18th century. When I went there, my main interest was the archaeology of the 18th century. But by the time I left Virginia, my head was turned in so many more directions. These new directions stemmed from a central question that was essentially unaddressed at Monticello at that time, however, asked by many who visited our excavation. How does the author of the Declaration of Independence reconcile with slavery and, in fact, become a recognized slaveholder? This was the late 1980s, and many of my fellow archaeologists were curious why I was interested in the archaeology of slavery. After all, how could that knowledge be useful here in the Maritimes? Canada did not have slaves, right? For me, it was more that Nova Scotia was not yet aware of our connection to slavery. As I traveled throughout Virginia, I became more and more convinced that the Maritimes did have a story that needed archaeological attention. Next slide, please. From Virginia, I entered graduate school and had a remarkable opportunity to direct archaeological excavations in the community of Africville, adjacent to the Bedford Basin. This was 1992, and the city of Halifax was planning a new terminal road that would go directly through the site where the Seaview African United Baptist Church had stood before being razed in the 1960s. It was recognized that an archaeology dig at the site prior to the road development could gather information about the historic church that could be incorporated into the design of a church replica and museum on the actual church site. Dalhousie University, the City of Halifax, and the Africville Genealogy Society came together to plan the project. I was a student in the Faculty of Architecture at the time and was offered the opportunity to direct the excavation. This was an important project, not only because of the subject matter and the potential to bring forward in a permanent fashion the incredible story of Africville and the numerous injustices that impacted the community, it was also an important opportunity to work directly with community members about a landscape and history that was theirs. In the weeks we excavated the church, over 2,300 artifacts were collected and many architectural details were recorded. In this slide, you can see the church before it was demolished, and my personal favorite artifact from the church archaeology dig below that, a God is Love banner that we discovered as we were excavating beneath some foundation material. It's bright blue and yellow and has been conserved and is on exhibit in the museum there. You also have a picture of a trench with brick that we excavated, and then there's a picture there of the inside of the museum. What was most impactful for me as an archaeologist was walking the community area with people who had lived in Africville. They knew they knew the place the best and were eager to share their stories and perspective, as well as point things out to me regarding the church. It took 20 years of community advocacy for the replica and museum to be realized. I encourage you to visit the museum if you've not yet been. Next slide, please. Contemporary to the Africville Archaeology Project was a developing interest in the rural African Nova Scotian community of Birchtown in Shelburne County. It was the media attention surrounding the community which stimulated a movement in the field of African Nova Scotian archaeology that has been sustained since the 1990s. At that time, a landfill site was proposed for a parcel of land near Birchtown. Not taken into consideration by county planners was the historical significance of the community and the surrounding landscape. Specifically, that Birchtown, a Black Loyalist landing established in 1783 following the evacuation of New York at the end of the American Revolution, had been the largest settlement of a free African population outside of Africa in the late 18th century. The proposal for the landfill was met with alarm from the community, who were mainly descendants of the Black Loyalist settlers. A response was developed by the newly formed Shelburne County Cultural Awareness Society. This group met locally to discuss the history of the community, but with the announcement of a new landfill proposed on the edge of Birchtown, viewed as a continuation of a long history of environmental racism linked to Black communities in Nova Scotia, their mandate expanded to include the development of awareness among African Nova Scotians and the Nova Scotian citizenry in general of the Black Loyalist story. Archaeology was considered integral to the knowledge building, and a landscape survey was sponsored. The aim of the survey, directed by archaeologist Laird Niven, was to record and investigate the historic places associated with the original Black Loyalist settlement. The survey identified 9 archaeology sites. The project was an important step towards the recognition of the slavery to freedom story of Nova Scotia at the end of the American Revolution, and confirmed through physical evidence the presence of undocumented 18th and 19th century occupations in the Birchtown area. The archaeological evidence demonstrated clearly that the early Black history of the Birchtown area needed protection and its significance acknowledged. In 1993, the survey results also made clear that African Nova Scotian history and archaeology was understudied and underappreciated. Archaeological fieldwork continued between 1994 and 2014. The objective was to locate archaeology sites and to assess the potential to gather archaeological and historical information on the Black Loyalist migration. Over 18 Black Loyalist sites have been recorded. By the middle 1990s, Black Loyalist history and its connection to Nova Scotia had become recognized as an important yet largely unknown story of the province's early immigrants of African descent. In 1998, a 2-year research initiative of the Black Loyalists was undertaken by the Nova Scotia Museum. The focus of the initiative was research, public education, and community partnership and development. Titled Remembering Black Loyalists, Black Communities, the project resulted in community collaborations and a wide range of communication tools that promoted the story of the Black Loyalist migration. Next slide, please. During the project, 2 areas were targeted for archaeological fieldwork. These were Birchtown, given the previously recorded finds, and Tracadie, a 3,000-acre Crown land grant area settled in 1787 by 73 Black Loyalists located in Antigonish and Guysborough counties. Considering the foundational archaeological investigations in Birchtown since 1993, the central theme of Remembering Black Loyalists, Black Communities was to gain a deeper understanding of the settlement through the testing and excavation of selected archaeological sites. Specific detailed focus was placed on the Goulden and Accra properties, which are suspected of having belonged to Colonel Stephen Bluck, the man who led the Black Loyalists in Birchtown. This slide here shows the place where we think the home of Stephen Bluck was located in Birchtown, and we're excavating through an infilled cellar. And you can see images of artifacts on the periphery of the slide. Most of the artifacts originally came from Great Britain, were manufactured there and imported to Nova Scotia as a British colony. But I want to highlight the little picture in the upper right-hand corner, which shows Indigenous artifacts. And I just wanted to take a moment to recognize that prior to the Black Loyalists settling in Birchtown, this was a Mi'kmaq landscape. And the Mi'kmaq were here and had been here for thousands of years. So we were not surprised to find in a place where folks were establishing their first homes evidence of previous Mi'kmaq presence. The other artifact I want to talk about is in the left-hand upper corner, the round earthenware bowl or jug. We have no other artifact like it. It's completely unique. And I think that it represents the strong ceramic making tradition that the enslaved had in the US. I think this is a jug that was made by a Black loyalist and carried northward. And we have been connecting with colleagues that specialize in this type of ceramic to try and identify the mark on the bottom of the jug and try and expand that story. During the project, let me see, I think I lost my place, 1 second. All right, next page. Okay. Tracadie had not had the benefit of previous investigation. Therefore, archaeological work consisted of field survey and background study of the land grant area. The goal was to locate and document settlement features and sites associated with the 1787 Browns-Briggs land grant, and 16 areas of archaeological interest were recorded. Archaeological work under Remembering Black Loyalists, Black communities generated over 16,000 artifacts. Archaeologists worked in tandem with museum, history and ethnology staff, and community members who knew the history of their settlements and could provide guidance regarding possible site locations and family histories. Community members joined us in the field as we searched for sites and also helped excavate when it was time to dig. Next slide, please. It is in this period of intensive field research that graduate thesis projects were undertaken and supported by the Nova Scotia Museum. Archaeological data from both Birchtown and Tracadie contributed heavily to the work. Research questions focused on the early architecture of the Free Black Loyalists, specifically the first shelters built by the Black Loyalists upon arrival and how the shelters evolved and transformed over time. Looking at this slide here, you can see 3 types of shelters archaeological evidence suggests were constructed by the Black Loyalists. You may be familiar with the first one in the upper left-hand corner, the dugout dwelling. There's a replica in Birchtown. They call it the pit house. And this was a subterranean dwelling, a very quick and efficient shelter if you needed that. And then we have evidence from a site of a kind of a combination shelter, which was partly subterranean and partly above ground. And I called that the 2-stage dwelling. And then we have this evolution to a more traditional colonial cabin, 1-room cabin with a central hearth feature. At the close of Remembering Black Loyalists, Black Communities project, a rich body of historical evidence about the newly freed Black Loyalists had been compiled. Descendant communities were enthusiastic about the long overdue attention, and this encouraged further, more in-depth investigations. Much was simmering about what had been learned, and discussions were underway about the possibility of a museum to permanently exhibit and share the multiple stories uncovered. The central question sparked for me at this juncture centered on the Black Loyalists who disembarked in Nova Scotia as enslaved individuals. They sat side by side with the newly freed Black Loyalists sailing northward from America. Where did they travel with their Loyalist slaveholders, and where is evidence of their daily lives? Building on the work of Birchtown and Tracadie, focus was moved to the valley region of the province and the daily lives of the enslaved. Next slide, please. I draw your attention to this slide, which details works on North Mountain in Annapolis and Kings County. Field work and research focused on this area from 2007 to 2012. The property was the plantation of prominent Loyalist Brigadier General Timothy Ruggles from Massachusetts. Ruggles was granted 1,000 acres in 1784 and developed a prosperous agricultural operation over a period of 10 years. He came to Nova Scotia with resources and connections. His family was engaged in slavery and were able to thrive in their new home due to the servants, laborers, and enslaved individuals under his direction. It was during this project that the NSM compiled considerable information regarding slavery in Nova Scotia and began networking with researchers and scholars studying the same. This slide, you can see the kind of vast landscape that Ruggles had. That's my husband standing on a cellar feature, and on a clear day you can see right down, this is on North Mountain, you can see right down to the Annapolis River, which was the extent of his grant. Below that is an excavation in process on North Mountain related to Ruggles, and we've interpreted this as a laborer's hut. And you see an image there of some of the artifacts we got from this area that included fragments of smoking pipes, a buckle, an iron buckle, some bones from birds. So this was a place where we concentrated after some survey to try and get a better understanding of daily life for those working under Ruggles. I also included here a runaway slave advertisement. These ads from newspapers of the day in the late 18th century are powerful illustrations of a slavery framework alive in Nova Scotia in the late 18th century. Next slide, please. This slide illustrates some of the features we encountered during the Ruggles project. The cellar of his original mansion house on North Mountain is largely intact and actually sits beneath a modern house structure. We were very grateful that the landowner gave us permission to go in and record this cellar and excavate some units. We also see to the right a long stone wall. This is actually part of Ruggles' principal estate in Massachusetts. We traveled there to study his plantation landscape and access archival records. He was a scientific gardener and experimented with the growing of things. This wall was part of a new garden area he was designing just prior to escaping an attack on his home by rebels as the American Revolution heated up. The other image shows an archaeologist setting up some units at the southern end of the Ruggles grant on North Mountain. We were looking for evidence of a reported slave cemetery there. I've also noted in this slide, which covers dissertation work, the 3 arguments I had in the dissertation. I won't go over them here, but I'm certainly glad to discuss them in the Q&A. Next slide, please. A turning point in the recognition of early Black history and culture in Nova Scotia was the development and opening of the Black Loyalist Heritage Centre in Birchtown in 2015. Contributing to the community push to establish this place was the archaeological and historical research of the Black Loyalists from Remembering Black Loyalist Black Communities. However, it cannot be overemphasized that it was the efforts and guidance of the community-driven steering committee and their commitment to fundraising that made the center a reality. Part of the Nova Scotia Museum family of museums, the Black Loyalist Heritage Centre is where visitors can learn the story of slavery to freedom among the artifact collections from excavations in Birchtown. The opening was a triumph and a tremendous celebration that received international recognition of the Black Loyalist story. Over 15 years in the making, the center sits within the Black Loyalist landscape with viewscapes to areas of surrounding settlement. This slide shows the center being built and the development of the floor displays inside. There are artifacts from the digs underneath that glass that you can walk over. It's a very open and it's incredible space of reflection. And you see the names of people that were listed in the book of Negroes on those large glass windows. If you haven't been, I highly recommend a visit. Next slide, please. This is just a quick slide showing staff and exhibit designers preparing artifacts to go into various cases. We also conducted archaeology prior to the ground disturbance for the building of the center. We wanted to make sure that where the building was going to be built, it was not going to impact any new Black Loyalist archaeology sites. So we did quite a bit of archaeology prior to the building, and then as different elements were addressed. Next slide, please. Trying to keep the momentum going and finding new ways to stimulate interest in the archaeology of early Black presence is a persistent issue. Working with and listening to community is the key, as is linking with archaeological professionals encountering the historic sites in their cultural resource management work. In recent years, a range of African Nova Scotian heritage and archaeological sites and landscapes have been encountered and recorded. Farmsteads, abandoned cemeteries, sites of African, Nova Scotian, and Mi'kmaq intersection are all in the provincial database and await further exploration. Next slide, please. A significant project in recent years that has helped develop the collaborative path forward is focused on the historic community of Beachville. Beachville is an African Nova Scotian community located to the west of the city of Halifax and was established by War of 1812 refugees. In 2013, an archaeological site, a house, was excavated by Dr. Jonathan Fowler of St. Mary's and revealed a rich artifact collection and architectural features linked to the early 19th century. The residence was destroyed by a sudden fire. Therefore, all contents were inside and much of the material culture largely intact. Though the exact identity of the inhabitants of the house and the date of their settlement is not yet confirmed, archival records for the site area suggest a Black refugee connection based on the site's location and the proximity of the Black refugee settlements at Beach Hill and Refugee Hill near Lovett Lake. Following this host excavation was the archaeological survey of additional land nearby by archaeologist Robert Shears. In 2014, an archaeological reconnaissance was organized with the goal of identifying archaeological resources related to the habitations and daily life of War of 1812 refugees that formed the Beachville community. The objectives of the archaeological work were to conduct a visual inspection of the area and document any features encountered. 3 archaeological features, including 2 possible houses, were recorded and are within the boundaries of the lots of Pompey Cooper and Benjamin Roberts, noted on the 1816 Beach Hill Land License Plan and the 1818 Refugee Hill Land License Plan. The excavation at Beachville and additional survey resulted in a tremendous opportunity to link with the descendant community. A community-centered information night at the Beachville Church, the community visit to the Beach Hill Refugee Hill sites, exhibit presentation and participation in Beachville Days, African Heritage Month exhibition, and the Finding Our Roots Symposium in February 2019 were opportunities for sharing and dialogue. Finding Our Roots in particular was a powerful day. The community set the agenda, invited the guests, directed the questions, and provided guidance, and asked that they take the time needed to determine what they would like archaeologists and researchers to do next. This slide shows what is just such a powerful artifact for me from Beachville. It's a slate roofing tile, and it was recovered in a number of pieces. And we could see on the tile some markings. So we highlighted those markings using a photography program. And what we have here is a slate tile that has been used as a tally sheet. So, you know, for me, the question is, what is the story behind that tally sheet in this home? What was being counted? Was it the eggs that were sold at market? Was it how many logs were harvested? You know, we don't know that part of the story, but it's an object, a slate roofing tile that was modified for another purpose. And it's detailing that daily life of regular folks on their homestead. And I think it's a really important artifact. Next slide, please. A couple more artifacts from Beachville. We have an iron axe head, and then we have this candle trimmer and sniffer. There's parts of that are missing. And then there's an image there of Assistant Curator Vanessa Smith. And as part of our Beachville Days participation, we brought out a range of artifacts and information we had on the archaeology dig. And, you know, we were just delighted to be invited and to talk with community members and show them the artifacts that were recovered. Next slide, please. Briefly, I wanted to mention another site area that we are researching. It's been on hold due to COVID travel restrictions, but I hope to get back to it. The place is Somerville in Hants County, and the site is Loyal Hill. This is a landscape that overlooks the Avon River. A Loyalist family received a land grant there in the 1780s and moved there from New York. A similar story to Ruggles, but however, there are some additional research opportunities. John Grant, the Loyalist head of family, brought with him 10 enslaved individuals, which is a high number for a Loyalist coming to Nova Scotia. Records indicate that the enslaved had their own residence, separate and somewhat distant from the main house. In our initial survey of the property, we think we found the location of that home. More archaeological work is needed. However, there are stories of family life, agency, and cultural practices of the enslaved that may lie below the ground. This slide gives you an idea of the landscape, which is sloping and overlooks the river. It also, to the side, there's a family cemetery dating to the period, and you can see one of the headstones there. And the community narrative is that the Grant slaves were buried in this place adjacent to the slaveholders. So lots of work to do at Loyal Hill, and hopefully we'll get back there soon. Next slide, please. I've reviewed some of the key work that has happened in recent decades, and I've left out a lot. And it was difficult to not mention so many things. But we're nearing the end of the presentation, and I want to take a moment to swing back to Emancipation Day if I can. I was very excited to see Emancipation Day recognition both federally and provincially. This event has inspired dialogue and a review of museum collections. It also stimulated new exhibits at the Nova Scotia Museum, as you can see here, portions of exhibits at the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic and the Museum of Natural History, and I encourage you to visit those. Additionally, Emancipation Day has inspired for me new potential archaeological possibilities as I learned about objects in the history collection of the NSM that are linked to the story. Next slide, please. Specifically, I draw your attention to this artifact, the sign for the Stag Hotel that operated in the Preston area around 1835. This is currently on exhibit at the M&H. Museum colleague Lisa Bauer prepared the label, and I highlighted the content here. Essentially, the Stag Hotel was established in the community of Preston by the Deer family, who were former Maryland slaves and War of 1812 Black refugees. William Deer escaped enslavement by Dr. John Dare, but refused to leave the county until he had rescued his wife Nancy and her brother. Having found emancipation in Nova Scotia, anti-Black racism and injustice continued, but their labors resulted in a business they could call their own. The original sign, this is the original sign that hung outside the hotel, and it is currently in the collection of the Nova Scotia Museum. The story of the Stag Hotel is incredible and holds many possibilities for hands-on learning and education, as well as partnership, if the community so directs. And that leads me to my second last slide, please. As curator of archaeology for the Nova Scotia Museum at CCH, I envisioned a project involving the site of the Stag Hotel. Historical research, archaeological excavation, artifact analysis and interpretation, exhibits to be shared, etc. would be tremendous, and I get very excited about it. But I have to come back to ground and reflect on what I want to investigate, why and how. Archaeology, the hands-on discovery of the past, has a powerful role in this journey. There is a large and deep toolbox to draw from, and it has been underutilized in the study of early Black history here. I think often about a recovery of meaning that comes from the multiple methods and multiple voices that can be archaeology. So what is our best direction forward? Our best direction with this work is centered on creating awareness and opportunities for education regarding the subject matter, Nova Scotia and Canada's slavery to freedom story. Innovative collaboration in bringing the story forward is a must and requires multiple opportunities for uncovering the physical remains of the past as a group. Access to education and training in archaeology and research opportunities for African Canadians and those desiring a path specializing in the field of archaeology of the African diaspora is long overdue. The best direction is simply community collaboration. That means archaeologists listening and taking guidance from those most connected to the sites and landscapes under study. This approach physically working through the day side by side and uncovering objects of ancestors is embedded with powerful possibilities to share and learn and create understanding. The approach aligns with the post-colonial paradigm in play in archaeology across Canada with Indigenous peoples. This is not superficial inclusion. This is not the inclusion of the other in order to validate decisions already made by Euro-Canadians. Applying the above results in a research program that is not only more responsive to the needs and concerns of the community, but is better in the end, history and science. The best direction is more archaeology. We have only just begun exploring what the archaeological record can reveal. Any number of themes can be explored: identity, race and agency, materiality, ideology, landscape, freedom from slavery, daily life, food and diet, the African Indigenous experience, and spirituality, to name a few. All are relevant, all need study in Nova Scotia, and all require collaborative conversation. We can be most impactful by practicing meaningful listening with community, sharing and working in partnership, and supporting individuals of African descent in their research and archaeological pursuits. This is true relationship building, and it takes time, years of focus and concentration, as well as long-term investment. We can challenge the current limited space for the story of slavery in Canada and Nova Scotia by building and compiling the work, developing the field of experts, supporting the research through community collaboration and academic programs, investing in a post-colonial and interdisciplinary way, and working with community to study and publicly present artifacts and collections. It cannot be said too much. For the work to be meaningful, holistic, relevant, and impactful, community voices must lead the way. As archaeologists, we hear this repeatedly, and we must heed the call. We can use existing policies to argue for the shift. We can look at the successes of others and use what is working now. In Nova Scotia alone, there's the Culture Action Plan, the Lord Dalhousie Report, equity, diversity, and inclusion strategies, Emancipation Day legislation, and changing museum and university mandates. Use what is readily at hand to push up against this current limited space for African Canadian archaeology of the enslaved and beyond. In this moment of change we are all experiencing, let's create new spaces and generate power together. Last slide, please. Thank you. Thanks to all. Thanks to the many people who have contributed to this work. I think that's it, folks. I'm delighted to take questions.
Thank you so much, Katie, for that presentation. Very informative, very relevant. So thank you again for agreeing to present to us today. We need to realize and take ownership that there was slavery in Nova Scotia, in Canada. It's not something specific to the US, which many people may have thought, and really is a testament and is a part of our Nova Scotia history. So thank you again. I'm quickly going to turn it back over to our moderator, Dr. Afua Kupu, who may have some remarks on this as well, and will moderate a short Q&A segment for us. So over to you, Dr. Cooper.
Thank you, Katie, for this really important talk. I've seen there's a note here in the chat thanking you from the brothers Ryan and wishing you all the best for the future. Just a lot of congratulatory notes in the chat, no specific questions. So I'd like to start off with one. When you were talking about the Birchtown site, Katie, you said the archaeologists, the specific archaeologists who work on the site said archaeology is integral to knowledge building. Can you give us some examples of how archaeology is integral to knowledge building?
Absolutely. One of the things I find most powerful about archaeology, and what drew me to archaeology, is the fact that we are uncovering physical evidence of daily lives, of regular folks. And I think the archaeology at Birchtown, we got away from focusing on the so-called prominent and colonial leaders and their estates and what they were doing. And we went to the places where the Black loyalists were. They were trying to homestead. They were trying to build shelters for that first brutal winter that was fast approaching. They were trying to figure out, how can we get food? How can we grow food? What fish do we eat? What are the herbs in the area that can help us? And archaeology, going to these sites and excavating and collecting that evidence, is informing us about how most people lived in the period. And I think that's really powerful. I think we want to understand the daily lives of folks like us, the folks that are just trying to get from one day or 1 week to the next with their families, and raise their families and provide for what they need, etc. So I find that, I absolutely believe that archaeology is integral to unpacking this story, because we need to understand the daily lives of the Black loyalists. And we have to move from strictly the documentary record, which, as we know, is filled with gaps about the daily lives of the enslaved or the newly freed that are arriving in Nova Scotia at the end of the 18th century. So it's kind of,
Absolutely.
let's go ahead. You go ahead.
No, I was saying absolutely. Archaeology is a more democratic way of telling this Black story, and of filling in, as you say, the documentary evidence. So thank you for that.
Sure.
There is a question from Elizabeth Barlow. She wants to know, is this story of history of slavery, of archaeology, the African Nova Scotian story over the centuries, is it now being taught in Nova Scotian schools?
As far as I know, it is not enough. And I think, this is a role where museums can play, because we can publicly present these stories. But I do recall when I was working on my PhD at Dalhousie, my oldest daughter was in high school in Halifax, and she was taking Canadian history, and her teacher told the class that slavery did not exist in Canada. And she argued with him. She said, "Excuse me, sir, but I believe it did." And my mother is studying this. She's at Dalhousie. She's been working on this. And he was determined to confirm that it did not exist. And I think we've come a long way from there. And I hear from students in high school about the history. But I think, there's so much more. It's the same with the story of the Mi'kmaq. It is in the curriculum now, but it can be wider and deeper and expanded much more. And I like the opportunity that archaeology provides to students. For example, when we were digging in Africville, we had archaeology students from Halifax West join us for a week.
That's
and
nice.
They got in the pits and they dug and they learned about Africville. And I bet they still remember that now.
Katie,
Yeah,
can
that's really amazing.
Katie, can you
I'm
turn your camera on, please?
Turn my camera on?
Yes,
Oh, I'm
please.
sorry about that. Sorry.
In the
Okay.
interest of time, I'll just gonna keep going. So on this issue of education and the museum and history, one participant wants to know if you, Katie, or your colleagues are brought into the schools with respect to the updating of the curriculum. So you may just make a note of that. And there's a question that's similar, so I'll also read it. And it says, what can the Nova Scotia museums do to ensure that there's representation from the African Canadian communities? Because you're talking about community collaboration.
Right.
To not only participate in archaeological digs, but also to be trained as archaeologists.
Right.
So,
Right.
that question has two parts to
Sure.
it. And then the third question, depending on how you want to look at it, is there any place in the Preston area that marks the Stag House?
Okay. I'm just making a note here.
So one,
To-
are you being brought in to help with the update of the curriculum?
right.
Are
Right.
you training African Canadian archaeologists? What's the museum doing to ensure there's proper representation from the Black communities?
Right.
And the last
So
question,
important.
is there any place that marks a Stag House?
Right. So I have not been approached to contribute to the development of curriculum for the education system. I have been invited many times as guest speaker into the classroom to share artifacts or to talk about um, the work. And also, every time I'm in the field, I try and provide opportunity for students to participate in DIG. But I have not been approached by the Department of Education to contribute to the formal development of curriculum. Education, there's what I presented today is part of a larger piece that I'm working on and Afu is familiar with. I would really like to see our academic institutions support archaeology at a graduate level where students could get the formal training to become archaeologists specializing in the African Canadian story. And we don't have that here, and we've been asking for it for a long time because the interest is here, but there's no place for a student to go to do graduate work in archaeology and focus on this subject matter. When I started the talk, I noted, we have 60 recorded sites. We have so many opportunities for research and training. And we need our academic institutions to help with that. When I do a dig, I have a number of volunteers and connect with people who want to come and try and create those opportunities. But I'm one person, and I need help. Regarding work specifically on African Nova Scotian sites, it's that community piece. I'm at a point where I want community members to tell me what they would like me to do. And so my path has been to, and let's talk about the Stag House. And I do have an idea where that is located based on some historical map overlays. But I will need to reach out specifically to the Preston community with the proposal, and then I need to hear from community. I would not just arrive in the community with my archaeology toolkit and begin work without having that important dialogue and direction, and the confirmation that community wants that archaeological work done.
Yeah.
Right? They may not want. I mean, we don't just because we know where something historical is, we don't have to dig it up.
Yeah.
Right? But it's so it's that relationship building, and it takes time. It can't be rushed because it has to be sincere, and I'm trying to build trust.
Yeah.
And that takes time, and you want to know one another, and you want to take the time to make that happen, because if we end up at the Stag in that area, we will want to make that such a successful opportunity for the African Nova Scotian community that live there.
Absolutely.
Did I hit all those questions?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
Okay.
So the academic institutions must be brought in to train people, absolutely, and to realize that, and the government as a whole, and to realize that this history, the archaeology, is important as we try to tell the stories of marginalized communities, of communities that haven't been, involved in the hegemonic discourse for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
But what is it that can attract people to go into these fields? So, I'm in academia myself. We see fresh, bright, smart Black students coming in to take their degrees.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of going further, they're going to law school or teachers college,
Right.
where they can,
Right.
they're almost sure they can find work.
Yeah.
But you're saying, I wrote here that there are 60 recorded sites in Nova Scotia.
Mm-hmm.
So there are opportunities for people to find work if they go home and tell mom and dad, I'm gonna do a degree in archaeology. Mom and dad may say, well,
Yeah.
will you be able to feed yourself?
Exactly.
Make a living. But you have done it.
I have. I have, and I've been. I'm most fortunate, and I reflect often on the people that helped me, because I didn't do it alone, and there was lots of feast and famine. And I'm most fortunate in that my husband is a trained archaeologist and a curator, so we have a shared discussion and a shared understanding of the challenges. Luckily in Nova Scotia right now, and it will continue, we have a very active, healthy, and busy archaeology consulting community.
Okay.
So we're seeing students that want to be archaeologists and are studying, they are able to find work with consulting companies working on a whole range of sites. And they get that field training, and they get that experience. I guess, and so there are different paths. We have archaeologists now that do that consulting work. In Nova Scotia, it's called Category C archaeology work, and it's pre-development assessment. It's a lot of Indigenous engagement. And then we have folks that want to do the academic path. And I think in general, the academic path is tough these days for any of the social sciences.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I know that if, for example, St. Mary's University had a graduate program in archaeology, it would be filled in an instant.
Right.
There are a number of students in the undergraduate program, and they would like to stay here and go on, but they don't have a place to go. It's something to be really thought about, and you have to, for me, it was, I've always been interested in trying to understand why human beings make the decisions they do throughout history. And I have found that archaeology can help me kind of figure out some of that. And it was an early connection. It kind of just, and I need to be outside. It's very physical. So there were things there that worked for me. But I do a lot of encouraging of young folks to become archaeologists and try and give them the opportunity to get in the pit and discover history. And try and support that.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie. I want to say to you and to Aja that I must leave by 1:15. I have another meeting. So I don't know if Aja would like to take over the Q&A.
Yeah, I can take over from here, Dr. Cooper.
There are no more questions in the Q&A. So
Thank you so much, Dr.
I
Cooper.
have another Zoom meeting that I have to join.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cooper, for moderating our session for us. I appreciate folks taking on the extra time. We're on the home stretch. So again, thank you very much. And we'll hope to see you again soon, Dr. Cooper. Thank you again, Katie, for again everybody for attending today's session. Thank you, Deputy Minister, our moderator, Rebecca, who was diligently behind the scenes from the Public Service Commission. It was great to collaborate with the PSC on this. Margot Hamden from ANZA, the team at CCH, everyone who helped bring this together, and especially to you, Dr. Katie. Emancipation Day, as Katie said earlier, it is really a milestone for us, but it is just one step towards righting the wrongs and the harm that people of African descent continue to experience. And we all have a role to play in acknowledging and in taking action against that. It's time for us to really pause and acknowledge our past. The archaeological evidence is evidence in itself, and we need to take ownership and move towards a real hopeful and present future for us in Nova Scotia. So I leave you all with the challenge to continue taking action and think about what more you can do to be part of the solution. I will leave the very last word, and again, I appreciate everyone staying a little longer. I will leave our last word to go back to our Deputy Minister, Dr. Kesa Monroe-Anderson, who will close our session. Thank you again, and over to you, Deputy Minister.
Thank you very much, Aja. Thank you, Katie, very, very much. Thank you, Dr. Cooper. And we know you must leave, but I wanted to say a special thank you to you, and I'll communicate with you later as well. But Katie, I really appreciate the respect with which you do your work. And that stands out for me in the way that you work with communities, you collaborate with communities in doing this work with African Nova Scotians, with African Canadians. And this work validates the very humanity of not only African Nova Scotians, people of African descent today, but the enslaved and the former enslaved of yesteryear, and people of African descent and their descendants. And you validate the fact that they existed, they lived, they survived in Nova Scotia, and descendants are here today continuing to live and to survive in Nova Scotia. And I believe that your presentation urges us to take the initiative to learn more. You've taught us today, and it reminds us that we have control over our own learning, and that we can carry this learning forward. We can share this knowledge. This session is being recorded. Please share it with a colleague, with a friend, a family member. Also, there was a session last week led by Dr. Charmaine Nelson of NASCAD, and that was powerful as well. Please, if you did not attend, please find that link, and Aja can provide that to all of us in the department again. And please watch it, please share it, and also, as Katie mentioned, there are exhibits that are still happening at the Nova Scotia museums, particularly the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic, the Museum of Natural History. Also urge you to visit the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia, which has another powerful presentation called Tyranny. Please visit. I'm going, I think, tomorrow to see it. And please learn more and pass the knowledge on. Learning and sharing go hand in hand, and both will help us in our efforts towards eradicating anti-Black racism. It's dependent upon all of us to do this important work, and I want to thank you all again for taking the time to be here today. Please pass it on. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.